Howdy, howdy. Sudovil here, and we're back for a second part of our essential units look at Dwarf Infantry versus Lizardmen Infantry. And in this episode, we really want to see what effects some of the buffs you can get actually have in terms of real value and the gold that it pulls. So if you bring in your Runesmith in conjunction with your Longbeard, and you just have Forge Fire, which adds 10% armor piercing damage, how much value does that add? How much more likely is the Longbeard in that scenario going to be to win? And we'll look at, Thorgrim has a buff. Where is it here? This is a Great Book of Grudges, +9 melee attack. Your Thane has a buff here that is +5 melee attack. We'll see here your regular Lord. This is actually quite a good buff, which is +5 melee attack, +6% weapon damage. And we're also going to look at the chevrons in the and how much they affect the equation when it comes to the capability of some of your units. And lastly, we're also going to look at fighting Saurus warriors with shields, because they have +6 melee defense better than your regular Saurus warriors. So those are the most likely that you're going to see in an online match against the Lizardmen. And then at the very end, I'll do a couple quick battles, hopefully just for fun, and we'll see how some of these things match up, and we'll see if we can't just have a bit of a demonstration. I'm not going to go through the analysis portion. I went through that in the first video, so if you watch the last one, you'll see how I went about the analysis. I'm going to skip sort of to the spreadsheet portion. If going through a deep dive and data like this is not really for you, you could probably skip to the end. If you really do want to find out, is Forge Fire more valuable than the buff you get from, your Lord or your Runesmith, or your Thane rather, you can kind of take a look down at the spreadsheet, which we're going to do now, and I'll go through them one by one and have a chat. And we're also going to have a look at how much rank increasing these chevrons actually has in terms of the gold you generate in above and beyond the base value of the unit. So we'll head over to the spreadsheet. Alright, so we have here the basic Longbeard valued at 650 gold versus the Saurus warriors at 750 gold. This is the same as the last one. This is where we're going to start our analysis. Basically because when you look at the gold differential, they're almost at zero after they're done, and the gold per minute is at -3 basically, and they're winning 20% of the time. Really, that's probably more like 10%. The Saurus warriors definitely do have a significant advantage in that matchup. But we'll just go through the different buffs, and we'll look at how much they change, and that's why I like this number, because you can basically assume this is an even match for the total gold spent. Even though we spend 100 less up front, in the end they match up quite nicely, so it's a pretty even match. So when we look at all the buffs, we can see how much more they add to your unit against the Saurus warriors. So we'll go down to the very first one, and we're going to look at Longbeards with 4 chevrons. This basically makes them the same cost, 757 gold versus 750 against the Saurus warriors, but it is a pretty massive difference. They go from losing mostly to reliably winning. You can see the DPS changes. I mean, the DPS is about 21 to 22. It's about even. And when you have those 4 chevrons, you get up to 26 damage per second DPS, and the Saurus warriors go down to 17. And there was a couple that were a little bit closer, but this is a reliable victory in a one-on-one Longbeard versus the Saurus warrior. I should have done just one chevron just to show the differential. I will be doing this all over again because two things are changing, and that is longbeards are getting a bit of a nerf, and chevrons themselves are becoming more expensive, and they give you less melee defense. So this same scenario might have these guys at 775, and the Saurus warriors would be doing, say, 19 DPS. We'll see exactly how that plays out, but I wanted to get this out so it's kind of a snapshot in time, and we can look at it again and update it after Tomb Kings launches on, I think it's Monday. All right, then I looked at longbeards with 5 chevrons just to see the difference, and it turns out their DPS doesn't actually change, and I thought that was really weird. And then I went back and looked, and at 5 chevrons you don't get any more melee attack, you just get more melee defense. It just makes the victory a little bit more reliable. And then lastly, we're looking at 6 chevrons. Now this brings their cost up to 812, and that's so that I can compare them later to the Saurus warriors with shields that cost 800. But they become incredibly good. You can see the gold doesn't really change with this extra chevron. You're still netting about 158 gold. Once you get up to 6, you're now netting 192. Your damage per minute, or your gold per minute, is up to 50, and your longbeards are finishing with in a very healthy condition at 3,000 hit points. So I think we go on to compare two different. Yes, so now the next one I'm going to look at is, what if you take a basic longbeard with no chevrons and you just put a Thane behind him? The Thane doesn't fight against the Saurus warriors, but the Thane just has that +5 melee attack bonus, and you just let the same Thane sit there and buff the longbeards. What does that do? So I want to kind of evaluate how powerful is that Thane's ability. So we go down here, and I just put, for reference sake, the Thane's ability in this scenario costs 237 gold. It gives +5 melee attack to any unit they're buffing, and +4 leadership, and the Thane himself costs 837 gold. So if you sit him behind, you still win, but it becomes less reliable. I'm not sure how I won this. I think it's because I had that +4 leadership, so maybe that has some value. But it brings you up to a value of 121 gold, 32 gold per minute. Which is not as valuable as having 4 chevrons, but you can see the benefit. It does, but at 121 gold, it's adding to the equation. Your Thane would have, costing 237 gold for this item, would have to buff at least 2 units for at least 4 minutes. So that's kind of give you an idea of how much that costs and how you would have to. What you would have to do to extract that value in a online match. So you'd have to buff on average at least 2 infantry units for at least 4 minutes in this scenario to actually pull the full value out of that extra 237 gold spent. Now I know there's other things Thanes can do, but that's just an easy way to look at it. Now the next one here is the longbeards with the grumbling guard. Again, this is just a one-on-one with the longbeards and the Saurus warriors. The grumbling guard is just in my test was just sitting behind them and buffing them so that they didn't lose any vigor. And this is kind of interesting because when we get to the bottom, the grumbling guard buff is actually stronger than the Thane's buff that you have to pay 237 for. But the grumbling guard does cost 1,000. But the grumbling guard can take out Saurus warriors all by themselves. So this buff by the grumbling guard is actually worth quite a bit of gold, and it's really where you see them generating the most value. The grumbling guard is in the last 2 minutes of the fight. Your longbeards become significantly more powerful, and any unit they're buffing near the end of the fight. Those grumbling guard are so good. And I guess if you were a man player, that would be a good unit to focus down if you saw the Dwarfs had it. But so if you buff 2 units for 4 minutes with a Grumbling Guard, you are going to get more value than having a Thane with that specific buff that you have to pay 237 gold for. And your Thane will not do nearly as much damage against a unit as your Grumbling Guard will, like against a infantry unit. So the next one we have, is the Rune Priest. So I wanted to go through the Rune Priest buffs and isolate them. So this is the Rune Priest sitting behind, not joining the fight, but spamming Rune of Oath and Steel, which is the plus 30 armor, as frequently as possible to see what difference does that make. It kind of makes a difference. The Rune of Oath and Steel only costs 82 gold, and in this configuration, the Runesmith himself only costs 682 gold. It does help. We now pull 67 gold out of this, but you would have to hit at least 2 units for 3 minutes to really get value out of that, and it's hard precisely to say. I would say Rune of the Steel is not as good as you'd think, as I thought it was, I guess. Anyways, it's very cheap, and you can hit it quite a lot. It might be more valuable if you're with Slayers or something like that, and the Rune Lord buff might be more valuable, but I didn't look at that. So they lost one of their fights and only won 80% of the time, but all of them were very, very close. Our average finishing was 1320 hit points. Theirs was 1600 because they start with a lot more hit points. The next one we looked at is a Rune Priest with Forge Fire, which is a 10% buff to armor piercing damage. Now I realize Longbeards don't have a lot of armor piercing damage, but I thought, well, let's just try it and see what it looks like. And it's, as you would expect, not quite as valuable as the Rune of Oath and Steel buff, and it costs a lot more, 158, but really this Forge Fire will be more effective when you're looking at buffing your armor piercing units. I just wanted to see it out of curiosity's sake. They did win at a rate of 80%, and it did actually end up at about the same hit point difference. There's kind of 2 weird things. This test I don't think went off quite right. You'd really need about 20 tests for all the data to settle down, but I'm just doing 5 tests each because they should have more DPS, and in this case they had less than the Rune of Oath and Steel version, and they should have, this functions, this looks correct, but in the case where they have Forge Fire, they should have more DPS, but they have less. But I suspect this is slightly more valuable than it's showing. The next one is the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. So if you put a Runesmith behind, again, your Runesmith's not fighting, but all they have is the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and they're going to spam that on the Saurus Warriors while your Longbeards fight. What value do they pull? And here there is just no doubt. The Rune of Wrath and Ruin is only 80 gold, and you go from barely winning to absolutely crushing. You're winning in 156 seconds as opposed to 280 seconds or 260 or 240. You're not even 3 minutes in. You have lots of hit points left, and I know the combined DPS of the two is 39, but the gold you pull out is 278. So really, to get full value from the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, like I might have hit it 4 times, I can't remember exactly, 3, something like that. You probably only need to hit that twice in an entire match, maybe 3 times, and you're going to get full value, especially if you hit a higher value unit than the Saurus Warriors. The Rune of Wrath and Ruin is just an incredibly great ability, and it is incredibly valuable, and you can see the difference here in the amount of gold that it pulls and how you can help one unit in a fight. It is very significant. So I also wanted to look at the Rune Priest spamming Rune of Negation, the 22% damage reduction, to see what kind of a difference that made. And it was actually the weakest one, only plus 23 gold, and it's really expensive, 162 gold to purchase it. And it was hardly better than nothing at all. You know, if the other situation was 0, it's only worth 220 gold. I mean, you would have to hit, I don't know how many, 8 units with it. I mean, this could be more valuable in other situations, I get it, but just to show it in context, Rune of Negation is actually not even as good as Rune of Oath and Steel, and it's way more expensive. Nor is it as good as Forge Fire, which is less expensive, and Forge Fire here is acting on a Longbeard that has no armor piercing, so that's pretty interesting, I think, as far as the buffs goes. Now, if we look at the Longbeard with a Lord sitting behind with the +5 melee attack and +6% weapon damage. Again, Lord's not fighting, they're just buffing the Longbeards to see how much value we pull out of that. Well, not bad, 143 gold. That ability costs 158 gold. You know, you're really hitting 1 unit for 4 minutes is going to pull value out of that. So if you hit 2 units for 2 minutes, use it yourself. I mean, that's actually a pretty good ability all around, and I think that has a high value. And you can see we start to win pretty reliably. We're ending up with 2,000 hit points, and the Saurus Warriors with 1,500, and we're winning all those battles. So it's actually a pretty reliable, pretty solid buff, which would seem to say that a base dwarf lord with this specific skill has a reasonable amount of value. All right, so if we go to Thorgrim, so Thorgrim has a +9 melee attack buff, this is +5 melee attack, +6% weapon damage, and this is Thorgrim's +9 melee attack. So I just wanted to see what does that do. Again, a reliable victory. We did end up with more hit points. We finished the battle definitely much sooner. Well, much sooner. 240 seconds, about 25 seconds quicker. You know, our DPS went up from 26 to 29. So Thorgrim's buff here is actually pretty good. It costs more. It doesn't seem to pull as much value on a single unit, because we only went from 143 to 173. So it would seem that this ability and Lord has more value. And Thorgrim is 1,889 gold with just this one ability, and our regular Lord is 1,158. So it's regular Lord's quite a bit cheaper. The one thing that Thorgrim has with this ability is it has a 55 meter range, where the Lord's ability is only 40, so it's easier to hit more units with it. Hard to say, but I think I will be looking at the Lords against the Lizardmen specifically, and looking at them in a few scenarios to see kind of which are the best Lords to take and why, and we can discuss that. But definitely that ability from Thorgrim of +9 melee attack with a 55 meter range is quite solid. You just need to hit 2 units with it, which is actually very easy to do with that 55 meter range. Now, I wanted to go and take a look at hammers. So just to see some of the buffs on hammers, that kind of runs down the buffs for, I think that's most of the buffs you can get, if it's not all of them. I mean, you can get a buff from one of the, not the Bugman's Rangers, I can't remember. And there might be something else that I missed. I mean, put something in comments if I did miss a good buff. But really, the highest value buffs are Thorgrim's and the Rune of Wrath and Rune. And then really just good high value buffs are just straight up chevrons, but those are going to be costed down in the next iteration. And the Grumbling Guard, it's almost like a freebie, because a Grumbling Guard pulls out nice value on its own. Plus, if it buffs anybody, it pulls out nice value. So yeah, the Longbeard with the Lord and Longbeard with Thorgrim pull out nice value, and that's actually a pretty good combination. All right, so hammer. I wanted to look at some of these buffs with hammer. This is the baseline hammer that we looked at in the last episode versus a Saurus Warrior at 750 gold. So I wanted to see what do some of these buffs do. So if we look at the hammer with Forge Fire, that's the Runesmith buff of 10% an extra 10% armor piercing damage. And again, the runesmith is not fighting in here. It's a one-on-one, and the runesmith is just buffing the hammerer. Let's see what kind of value that pulls out. Pretty significant. You can see the DPS for the hammer goes up from 67 to 79. We're going to pull approximately 120 gold out of that. I never put the cost of this in here, did I? No, it's like a 200 and some. The thing is, you go from the battle taking 93 seconds to taking 76 seconds. So that is pretty significant. So if you are going to put a hammer in your line and you want a runesmith in there, consider picking up Forge Fire. I mean, it's, you know, you're going to have to, you're going to get, if you hit these hammers and they kill 2 units and fight for basically 2.5 minutes, you've gained all your value back on that ability. Because it's a passive, you don't have to hit it or nothing. Oh, and I wanted to look at the hammer with Forge Fire and Rune of Wrath and Rune. I wanted to see how fast a runesmith and a hammer in conjunction using the Forge Fire buff plus the runesmith using Rune of Wrath and Rune, although the runesmith is not fighting himself, could destroy a Saurus warrior. And here we go. We get all the way up to 90 DPS and 67 seconds. So this is almost what the Peak Gate Guard are doing all by themselves. They do just 95 DPS and about 60 seconds. So because this is the configuration that I would take a runesmith in at 834 gold with Forge Fire and Rune of Wrath and Rune, and perhaps a Hammer of Karak draws. But because that hammer, you put that on Krokgar, it's quite powerful. All right, so I wanted to also just check the hammer and the Lord, because the Lord with the +5 melee attack and +6% weapon damage is also, would seem to me to be quite a good combination, and it is very good. It's almost the same as the hammer with Forge Fire at 10%. This gets the hammer up to 78 DPS, and again, a very reliable victory. Not quite as good as Forge Fire by itself, but it's close. This ability, though, with the Lord is less expensive. So that's pretty much it for the buffs that I looked at against the Saurus warriors. You can see that Forge Fire is something that is rarely taken, but it might be worth a second look in some situations. I'm not saying it's a must-pick. The only must-pick ability I would say that there is here is obviously having the Grumbling Guard, so that they can buff the Vigor. And if you're going to bring a runesmith, I think you should, most likely in this matchup, the Rune of Wrath and Rune is amazing. It is so powerful. And the Lord by himself, like a very cheap Lord at 1158, does have a pretty strong buff. He does have another buff too, which is a melee defense buff, which could come in handy with hammers and these types of things and make our Lord a little bit tankier. But anyway, so I wanted to look at the same units, our quote-unquote essential units, against the Saurus warriors with shields, the 800 gold ones, and see how they did just straight up, one-on-one, no buffs, no nothing, to see if they still pulled out gold against those units that were more expensive. And the answer is yeah. So the Dwarf Warrior now at 100 less gold with the Saurus Warrior Shields. They're not winning everyone. They're winning 80%. I would say that will go down. There was some very, very close fights that we won. It's probably closer to 50-50, to be honest. But the big thing is we're still pulling out gold. Even in the one where we lost, we still made 23 gold. So the Dragonfire Warriors of Dragonfire Pass are still very, very good, and that's with no buffs. And they still finish that off in 276 seconds, which isn't awful. Their DPS is nice and high at 25. So let's look at the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass with the Grumbling Guard. I wanted to test that individually. So that's the Grumbling Guard is not fighting here. Again, they're just buffing them with that aura to see the difference. And here it is. So the victory goes from barely, maybe 50%, to solid. And notice one of the big changes here is the DPS for the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass goes up from 25 to 31. And really where that comes in to play is near the end, when the Saurus Warriors with shields become exhausted. They just mow them down. It is really like a snowball effect. They start losing, and then as the vigor of the Warrior of Dragonfire Pass kicks in at fresh, they just start crushing them. So very, very good value. Again, we're getting almost 100 gold value out of this. You know, an increase of 30 gold per minute, increase of DPS. The Grumbling Guard are just such a good unit, and that really helps. So if we look at the Longbeards with 4 chevrons, now that's the Longbeard at 750 gold. How do they stack up with against the 800 gold Saurus Warriors with shields? Yeah, not bad. They're winning more than they're losing at 80% here, but this was closer. I would say this is less than 80% that they're going to win that. But that would show you that the Longbeard is just straight up a better unit than the Saurus Warriors with shields. And that's probably why they're getting a nerf. Oh, that's exactly why they're getting a nerf. It is what it is. And it is fair. I mean, they're just a straight up better unit when you're looking at that cost. They get more gold. They're at 103 and 23 per minute, and they're cheaper. They're just better. Obviously, our units can't be healed and whatnot, but you put a Grumbling Guard near them or anything that can buff them, they just become that much stronger. Right here, so I put the Longbeards with 4 chevrons with the Grumbling Guard nearby, and it's just a huge, worth 150 gold. The DPS goes from 22 to 27. The Saurus Warrior Shields DPS goes down. They just finished that in 230 seconds, have 3,000 hit points left. It's the Grumbling Guard. When I was testing this, I was kind of going over and over in scenarios to trying to hone down the value of that Grumbling Guard in multiple scenarios. And then finally, I wanted to look at the Longbeard all by themselves with 6 chevrons, because that puts them at about exactly the same gold value of the Saurus Warriors with shields, and they're not as good as the 4 chevron version, obviously, with the Grumbling Guard, but they're the same price. You don't have to worry about buffing them. You can send these Longbeards with 6 chevrons straight up against the Saurus Warriors shield anywhere on the map, as long as there's no buffing or weird charges going on. They're just gonna win, and very reliably. Like, maybe these Saurus Warriors win this 1 in 10 times, something like that, but it's just a reliable victory. Alright, and the Hammer versus the Saurus Warriors with shield. So we've seen the Hammer against the regular Saurus Warriors, but not the shielded variants, so I wanted to see how they stack up. They're not quite as good. They really start losing value fast. They're only pulling 54 gold out of that, and 34 gold per minute. And it goes up to 127 seconds, so just over 2 minutes for them to finish the Saurus Warriors with shields off. But they're still not bad, and they'll win. And when they're done, they can go fight someone else. I mean, they still do 54 DPS. They are still incredibly strong, and they are still a great unit. And that's pretty much it for the basics of the infantry testing that I did. So I just want to go do a couple quick battles, just for fun, to see a few things, and so I'll see you in game here in 1 second. Alright, so what we've got here is we're just going to be fighting against the Saurus Warriors with shields, and I think I correctly put myself as the defender this time, so hopefully this works out a little better. And I just wanted to double check, back check, and demonstrate how powerful our Longbeards are right now. So if I take them, chevron them up to 812, so they're just slightly more expensive than the Saurus Warriors with shields. Let's just go and see how they stack up and how that fight goes. And hopefully they'll run across at me this time because we're properly the defender. And it'll be interesting to see what configuration they're in, because one of the things they said they're going to do in the Tomb King's patch notes is, okay, well, they're fairly well across, so I'll just put them out like this. And we'll group. Start battle. Okay, oh good. Okay, I want you here, you. There we go. Well, that's a pretty nice engagement, actually. It's not too bad. You can see, though, we're winning handily already, with the exception of this guy right here. Where are you? You're on the end. He's pretty even. Now he has gone to winning. I've done this, obviously. I've done a lot of testing, so I know the result. The results on longer battles tend to be a lot more reliable. You can expect the result to be what it is. When you have very high DPS units like the Peak Gate Guard, the results can have a lot more variance. But this is a reliable victory for your Longbeards. But it takes a very long time. We are on fast forward, but if you want to hold the line reliably and then, you know, be back here doing things with other units, or you have cannons, or, you know, you have your archers, you just don't have to worry about them when they're at 6 chevrons. You don't have to think about them. They're going to win unless something major happens. They're going to win 90% of the time. And there we go. So those guys are off. These guys will be off soon. But you can see we have plenty of health. 38, 36, 35. A very, very, I would say, reliable victory. Okay. And we'll end that battle. I wanted to go and take a look at buffing someone. Just as a fun battle to put in there. I've forgotten what I was going to do. I think we're at the end of it anyways. You can see how reliable these guys are. We, in the last video, saw how good the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass are and how good the Grumbling Guard are. The Peak Gate Guard, they didn't quite go as good as I want. I mean, let's just have another fight with them, just out of curiosity's sake. Because I was surprised that they didn't chew through them a little quicker. And we'll put our Runesmith. We'll get Forge Fire with him, and Rune of Wrath and Rune. Maybe I could have played that a little better, or maybe it was just randomness. That all right. We'll see if we can do a little bit better this time, if I can stay a little focused to make sure I get off my Runes of Wrath and Rune. I was looking at that battle, and I probably should have used it on a single unit till it was completely gone. In fact, alright, so I'm going to just push off to this side. That's really how you would be using these guys. Group. Okay, and lock. Yeah, lock them, start battle. And we'll move along. Okay, you almost ready? I just want to make sure I hit that Rune of Wrath and Rune quickly. Alright. Let's go here. Again, that didn't work. Well, we'll see if we can get a little better result here, but... Okay, we're attacking all here, so let's just get that going. I don't know if I'm doing better this time or not. Completely surrounded this time. Oh, yeah, I think we're gonna lose. That seems a little bit odd because we did pretty good. Like I fought the regular Saurus warriors and I was beating them pretty handily with just the Peak Gate Guard all by themselves. Yeah, well, I guess we're gonna beat them, but just barely. Could have engaged. I lost my entire charge bonus. Anyways, just for fun, just to end the video, because it's a short video for me, I guess. I guess I could bring another lord or something with them, but oh, no need to. I basically got the basic information out. Now I'll go over some of the other things I'm going to be testing, which I haven't tested yet. I just haven't had the time. I am going to first of all, as soon as the Tomb Kings are out, I do want to just retest some of these things now that I have some data kind of locked down and have snapshot on YouTube to see what the differences are, and look specifically at the Longbeards and the Ironbreakers, because they got a big buff in this patch, or they're getting a big buff in this patch with +2 AP damage, which is going to be huge. And also to see what the chevron difference is, like, because their chevrons are more expensive and they provide less melee defense. The next thing I really want to do is I want to take a look at our lords and look at how they stack up against the Saurus warriors and against Krokkar specifically. And I also want to take a look at what combination of lord and missile infantry tends to work the best, just to get, I mean, I know which ones I really like. I mean, I like the Uthar's Raiders. They're extremely good, and Rangers with great weapons. You just have those two. You hit them with that, what is it called? Marked by Uthar. Because Krokkar's going to only have 15% missile parry now. And so minus 24 missile parry, basically he's going to have no missile parry. So as long as you got him locked down, you hit him with that, and you know, your missile damage is all armor piercing. I think it's going to crush him, but there may be a better combination. Iron Drakes are going to be 800 now, or 800 and 700. Wow. So, and I don't know if these guys are going down, but maybe with the Iron Drakes at 800, they're really coming into the game, and we'll see them more frequently. I also want to take a look at our war machines. Obviously, Bolt Thrower, you know, the Grudge Thrower is getting a buff. Goblobber is very good because of its reduction in leadership. The Organ Gun is getting more expensive and less accurate, and the Flame Cannon is going down to 1150. So I'm gonna want to see which artillery does good there, but I'm probably not going to get to all of that. Those are my plans for the rest of the series. I'm probably going to pick up, and just because the Tomb Kings are new, I'm going to do some testing with the Dawi versus Tomb Kings, and I'm probably going to do a bit of a, I might film it, I don't know, I'm going to do a bit of a campaign against the Tomb Kings with on the faction unlocker, and play one of the southern factions in the Mortal Empires map, just to have fun. And, you know, that's kind of my plans for the next little bit. Anyways, I hope you found this interesting, and I hope you picked up some good information if you play any multiplayer, or maybe you just like this type of analysis. I had originally planned to do a bit more of a video where I actually showed a lot more on the screen of the video, and, you know, putting information down in a more professional manner, but there's no way I was going to finish this video before the Tomb King drop if I did that, because it takes me way too long. I don't have real strong skills in video editing. So anyways, like I said, you found that interesting, you know, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. I really, you know, I do this for fun, and it really love it when I see it pop up on my phone. I got a new subscriber. It's very motivating, because, you know, you always got to find time in your life to do this, and You know, sometimes I have lots of time, sometimes I don't, but you know, it's motivating to find that extra half hour. Definitely hit the like button if you've enjoyed this, and please leave a comment. I know I've said this so many times. I really love comments, and kind of touching base with all the other dwarf lovers out there, all my other Dowie kin. Other than that, have a good one. I'll see you soon.